Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is the country director for the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. Please put your hands together for John Macharia as he comes to speak to us.
Good morning. Ambassador Ali Mohammed, the Special Envoy for Climate Change in the Office of the President, Job, the board chair for 𝐇𝐚𝐩𝐲𝐬, Joseph, the CEO of the Kenya Climate Innovation Center. I've seen colleagues from AGRA. I overheard you people talking about the East Africa Dairy Development Project. I was actually a staff there, and I was actually the business manager in charge of Rwanda. And colleagues present from across Kenya and across the continent. As you've heard, my name is John Macharia. I'm currently serving as a country director for AGRA in Kenya. AGRA is an institution that was founded in 2006 by the late Kofi Annan, together with a number of friends of Africa, if I might call them that. And at the time, if you remember, Ethiopia had just come from a drought, and if you remember the song, "We Are the World," right? It was sung because of drought. And perhaps in my own youth, that is the first time I got to know that there is something called drought, and severe drought for that matter. And in response to that, Kofi Annan and colleagues established AGRA with the main mandate of driving a food and nutrition transformation across Africa. Our mandate is to work with African governments to think about policy, to think about how we can actually transform agriculture to not only feed ourselves. We have worked in issues to do with agricultural markets, seed systems, fertilizer systems, and agricultural finance systems. But over the years, we have noted that the existential threat to agriculture is actually the issue of climate. In Kenya in particular, I think our drought cycles have come from 10, 15 years to 8 years to now almost 5 to 3 years. We have been fortunate that in the last 3 years we've actually had rain, but before that we actually had 6 seasons of drought. And in response to this issue of drought that is not only happening in Kenya, AGRA has partnered together with the African Union, and we are driving reforms around the comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Plan. In February of this year, we had the Kampala Declaration that sets out the agenda from 2026 to 2035. And one of the new things in that particular declaration is the issue of stressing of how African governments need to stress the issues of building community resilience towards the issues of climate. The other important thing is about sustainable development. And sustainable development is rethinking the way we think about the use of water, rethinking about our relationship with forestry, rethinking around agriculture and biodiversity, but also thinking about energy sources and things like that. And that is something that is new, that AGRA together with the AU are trying to help African governments to domesticate. The second thing, and I'm glad Ambassador is here, we have been partnering with different governments, I think right now Kenya and Ethiopia, around the Africa Climate Summit. And I think most of you who've been able to attend that particular session or that particular event, you can testify how Kenya, through the leadership of Ambassador Ali Mohammed, how we're actually championing the question of climate and how we need to really domesticate quite a number of things on climate. The other important event at a continental level is the Africa Soil Health and Fertilizer Summit. And in this case, one of the interesting things is that we were able to bring people who are talking about soil health and fertilizer. You all know the conversation between organics and chemicals. But right now, the thinking is it's not an either or, it's an and conversation, because you need to have natural, things that are happening in the soil, but they also need to be supplemented. So that is one thing that we're seeing. There's a now growing harmony between the soil health experts. And of course, AGRA has the Africa Food Systems Summit, where we also host an agribusiness deal room. And the last 2 years, actually the AGRF, as it was called, has happened in Nairobi twice in the last 10 years. And I think last year in Rwanda, the focus was actually the issue of climate. a risk share facility to develop financial products for climate that are green. And we are trying to work with about 3,500 SMEs that are working on the green space. And this particular fund is to give them liquidity, either through CapEx or through working capital, to make sure that people actually have products that they can actually buy that can help them mitigate around climate. I believe this year or last year we had the green taxonomy already established. So that is already beginning to provide a retinue of products and services that can actually be funded. And this is about a $132 million credit facility. Through the government of Finland, we have the Green Fund for Youth Employment, and this is about an $8 million investment to try and impact on 7,000 youth SMEs that are dealing on issues to do with climate. So, like my friend Murabula says, we're not trying to, driving entrepreneurship. I think we're trying to really drive financing with the entrepreneurs that are already on the table. We're just closing down on a project called the Strengthening Regenerative Agriculture in Makueni, and this was funded by the IKEA Foundation. And Job, you'll be happy to know that in the 6 seasons of drought, farmers who are actually adopting regenerative agriculture still had a harvest that was able to be seen, that was able to sustain communities. Through the Embassy of the Netherlands, we closed down a project called Strengthening Laikipia Isiolo Samburu Nexus Project. And this was talking about food, water, and energy, and the interplay between all this to try and make sure that we are investing sustainably. And to my last 2 points, talking about entrepreneurship, I think it's vital that we continue to innovate around the different products that can create this space. I think early this week we saw NCBA is beginning to think about not land as collateral, but music copyright as collateral for loans. What would collateral for climate need to look like, such that you can go to banks and say, this is green. Can you consider this as new forms of collateral so that you can unlock capital for businesses? And the last thing to say here, I think outside of the governance conversation of the nation, the second most important conversation is around climate. So I'm happy that this conference is taking place. But the third most important conversation is about youth. And it's youth intentionality. And it's not about pointing fingers. It's you as a leader taking the initiative and saying, this is also my problem. Because where I sit, the age of a Kenyan farmer is 64.5 years. The median age of all Kenyans is 19.8 years. If you think about 2030, the SDGs, if you think about Africa 2063, which is the AU, and ask the question who will be feeding Kenya, it's certainly not the 64-year-old person. It needs to be the 19-year-old. But how are we intentionally providing the youth with productive assets to begin to bear the burden of feeding this nation? All the studies we've done with the youth around agriculture, the existential risk is climate. And they're not thinking about agriculture in the traditional way. For them, it's agribusiness. And even as we think about mitigating climate or adapting to climate, what does that mean for the youth who are in this room, who are in Kenya, and who are in the continent? And I would love that we also take that angle of youth and agribusiness in climate. What does that look like? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Macharia, for that. He may have been modest with his qualifications, so let me give you just a little bit about the man who just spoke here. As country director, John is responsible for managing results for the Kenya portfolio with the government of Kenya, donors, private sector, and implementing agencies. He previously worked as lead program officer for Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, still under AGRA. And so you get the wealth of knowledge, experience, and expertise that he carries. But just to double click on some of his points, I have been fortunate enough to moderate events of such nature in Lagos, Nigeria, with the African Union, and in Kampala, Uganda, particularly CADEP, which is where the Kampala Declaration came from, and it was like a stock taking for post-Malabo Declaration. And ladies and gentlemen, reporting on that also, we found out that there's a lot that still hasn't been achieved over the 10 years that the post-Malabo declaration was set. And part of it is also goodwill. And from a finance point of view, because I'm a business reporter, Ambassador Ali, this is a message we need you to take to the government for goodwill, is that part of the commitment in post-Malabo declaration was that African governments are supposed to commit at least 10% of their annual budgets towards agriculture. And in this case now, with the realities of our time right now, is that we have to commit that also in smart agriculture, because our food import bill is really huge. And we have the largest arable land globally in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Now, please, if anyone here is from AU, working with African Union, taught me that you do not mention or say things like the sub-Saharan Africa. Africa is just Africa. So those are some of the commitments that were not honored in the last report. Please push a little more to His Excellency and the executive so that we commit at least 10% of that 4.2 trillion national budget towards agriculture and by extension smart agriculture. Lastly, on financing, as John Macharia was speaking here, I caught the queue once again. We were in Lagos, still with the African Union, trying to strike deal rooms around livestock and livestock systems development. And the question of collateral came up a lot, and even yesterday we had a chat about it here with the panel that the ladies were hosting here. The current financial models do not support agriculture as it is. You cannot use the same metrics to judge creditworthiness of a real estate farm. The same metrics are applied on the farmer. Do you get the mismatch? And so part of the suggestions in those panels were the same way we have real estate banks, the same way we have infrastructure banks dedicated to those particular sectors. Can we also create such for agriculture, for climate, and the like? That is food for thought that we can take home from here. If there are rapporteurs, perhaps that is information we could share on. But I am happy that the financial institutions are adapting fast enough to be able to accommodate some of these things. I mean, you've just cited the NCBA with that, so it's a beautiful thing. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the next speaker, but he will be speaking to us virtually. I'd like the media team to cue his message for us, but let me just give you a bit about him. Professor Patrick V. Vakoyen is the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, the foremost international organization dedicated to the challenge of adapting our world to the global climate emergency. He also serves as the Chancellor of the University of Nairobi. As founding CEO of the Global Center for Adaptation, Professor Vakoyen has built a global organization supporting climate-active adaptation projects in over 40 countries, creating almost 1 million jobs cumulatively. Together with the Africa Development Bank, former Group President, Dr. 𝐇𝐚𝐩𝐩𝐸, Professor Vakoyen is the architect of the world's largest adaptation program with a funding or a portfolio of about $25 billion, which has already shaped $15 billion of resilient investments on world's climate investment on the world's most climate vulnerable continent since its inception in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, let's listen in to Professor Vakoyen's speech, which is done virtually. Media team.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to address you today at the Africa Climate Investment Summit in Nairobi, a city that represents the future of Africa, dynamic, innovative, and resilient. And the theme of this summit, Catalyzing Climate Entrepreneurship, captures what this moment demands. Because, colleagues, across Africa, our young innovators are not waiting for permission. They are inventing the future, building enterprises that tackle floods, droughts, and food insecurity with ingenuity and determination. Yet, despite this promise, the hard truth remains. Less than 10% of global climate finance supports adaptation, and even less reaches the communities who need it most. Africa itself needs at least $70 billion every year to adapt, to build resilient infrastructure, protect food systems, and safeguard livelihoods. Current flows fall far short, and this is not a failure of ambition, it's a failure of delivery. We know what is needed. Governments must create enabling policies. Banks and investors must innovate with blended finance and de-risking tools, and impact investors must see adaptation not as charity, but as a growth frontier, one that builds markets, stability, and opportunity. At the Global Center on Adaptation, we are proving that adaptation finance, it works. Why? Because through the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, or AAAP, we're helping financial institutions across the continent rewire capital flows, turning adaptation from a cost into a value proposition. Just last year, we launched the Africa Business Adaptation Platform with the World Economic Forum to mobilize billions of dollars for private sector-led adaptation, connecting global investors with local opportunities. And through our Adaptation Finance Masterclass, we're training financial leaders to see resilience as the next frontier of competitiveness. The message, colleagues, is clear. The age of adaptation investment has just begun. And nowhere is that more visible than in the extraordinary success of Youth Adapt. Since 2021, this initiative, co-created by GCA and the African Development Bank, we have invested in 41 youth-led enterprises across 20 African countries. These enterprises are driving innovation in agriculture, water, waste management, and technology. So as we close this year's Youth Adapt demo days here in Kenya, I want to send a simple message to all of you. Investing in adaptation is investing in Africa's future. It's investing in food on the table, lights in the home, and security for the next generation. It's investing in the creativity, courage, and brilliance of Africa's youth, who are already leading where others hesitate. Together, let us turn adaptation ambition into lasting resilience. Let us ensure that the entrepreneurs and innovators gathered with you today in Nairobi have not only the ideas, but also the capital to shape a resilient, low-carbon Africa for all. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Vakoyen. As a communications professional, two things come to mind that correctly stated, Africa's population has the least, or rather the median age of 19. And so this inclusion thing is normally a very beautiful conversation when it's being said here in panels and in conferences, but I hope we actually do it for real. And the other thing also for me is that we help as much as possible to decode the climate conversation from an elitist point of view now to break it down to everyone else within the African continent, because we still understand there are nuances like illiteracy or the diversity that Africa experiences. I mean, Kenya, we are how many languages? About 44, right? So how do we reach those people with the information about climate change in the best way possible to get to them? Those are my two insights from Professor Vakoyen's speech. Let me introduce the last speaker for this morning before I introduce the next panel. Ambassador Ali Daud Mohammed, a globally renowned expert in climate change, environmental governance, and sustainable development, is the special envoy for climate change in the Executive Office of the President. With over 3 decades in senior public service, he has led key policies tackling Kenya's environmental challenges, and as the chair of the Africa Group of Negotiators, elevated Africa's voice in global climate change negotiations. He has served as the president of the ICCM, sir, you'll tell us what that is, and on the UN Climate Finance Committee, and excels in treaty negotiations, marine resources management, and multilateral cooperation. His brand of leadership bridges policy, global diplomacy, and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, let's show our love and appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Ali Daud Mohammed as he comes to give us his keynote remarks.
Good morning. Chairman Job, my friend Joseph, Macharia, and all distinguished delegates and participants. I will not tell you what ICCM means. I will allow you to go and find out what it means because it was you who was explaining it, but I will leave that to you. I am very delighted to be here with all of you on this very important meeting of Africa Climate Investment Summit. I was supposed to be here yesterday for the opening session, but I could not because of, as you will know, competing demands. As we approach the end of the year and as we approach the dates for the next conference of parties on climate change, there are a flurry of activities, meetings, conferences, and so on. You know, this thing called virtual meetings has made life even more difficult because there's so many demands on all of us. So I was attending an equally important two-day high-level meeting addressing similar topic to the one that Joseph, you've brought here. It was about investment, and it's about unlocking finance and investment for institutional clean cooking in Africa. Her Excellency, the First Lady, Madam Rachel Ruto, was our guest of honor yesterday, and we had cabinet ministers and other senior officials also attending that meeting. We brought together, as I believe also here, the full range of clean cooking ecosystem, philanthropies, DFIs, that's development finance institutions, local commercial banks, impact investors, a number of regional, national, and international NGOs, carbon project developers and buyers, and blended finance experts. And I believe this room is also full of similar ecosystem. Because addressing the interlocking challenges of climate, nature, and development cannot be done by public sector alone. It requires all hands on deck. It requires all sectors to work together. It requires the public sector, it requires the private sector, and it requires, of course, multilateral entities as well. And I'm very glad to see a number of institutions and organizations supporting this conference here. I'm informed that yesterday the conference focused on the broad issue of macro-financial landscape of climate. As global temperatures continues to rise, even beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius that we had agreed 10 years ago in Paris, the world, of course, faces very urgent investment needs to build resilience, which is adaptation, and to meet the goals of climate. A very high-level team called the Independent High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance, who have started working on putting together varied information about what is required for climate finance. I've given the estimates that climate investments needed, particularly for the emerging markets and developing economies, excluding China, is up to $2.4 trillion by 2030 and $3.3 trillion by 2035. Huge amount, isn't it? yet investments, whether climate investments or other foreign direct investments, continue to elude Africa. According to the Africa Development Bank, our continent just receives barely 3% of the global climate finance. And the UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, report shows that last year in 2024, the total foreign direct investment inflows into Africa was just 97 billion US dollars, representing 6% of the global foreign direct investment flows. Yesterday, at the other conference that I mentioned, I also referenced a report by the International Energy Agency, IEA, in Paris, which confirms that Africa remains the only region in the world where the number of people without access to clean cooking continues to increase. We are now about 1 billion Africans who don't have access to clean cooking, with all the devastations and negative impacts on health and economy and so forth. And whilst the other parts of the world is trying to address and reduce that number, in our continent, that number, unfortunately, continues to increase because of lack of investment. And we risk falling further behind if no action is taken and accelerated. The same trend also obtains in the wider energy sector. Here too, as the world accelerates, the continent of Africa, which is home to 60% of the world's best solar potential, the continent with the abundant critical mineral resources, and the growing workforce that we just had, the age. What is true for Kenya is true for the rest of the continent. It's just about 19 years average age. We account for just about 2% of the world's investment in renewable energies. And with the current uncertain geopolitical tensions and shifting global dynamics and global competitions, the situation is only likely to become worse. At the last conference of parties called COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, I had the privilege of leading negotiations for the African group, where we pushed very hard for what is called NCPG, the new collective quantified goal for climate finance. And as I'm sure you all are aware, after haggling for over 2 weeks, we succeeded achieving the 300 billion by 2035. But also in Baku, the agreement was for a 1.3 trillion per year by 2035, called the Baku to Belém roadmap. And we're looking forward to the report of the COP presidencies, COP29 and COP30, on how that target of $1.3 trillion will be achieved. I trust that all these issues were covered yesterday, and experts here have made good recommendations on how to overcome the persistent lack of investments to support growth and resilience in Africa. I have heard and I'm told that the session today is about adaptation, and I just saw my good friend, Professor Patrick, passionately making the case for adaptation, which is certainly a priority for Africa and all other developing countries. COP30, which is happening in just 2 weeks, the presidency has placed adaptation as a central issue that needs to deliver meaningful progress, especially the issue of adaptation finance. In Glasgow 2021, there was a pledge to double the provision of adaptation finance from the 2019 levels. The pledge, which is yet to be met, of course, is also due to expire this year in 2025. So Belém is a crucial, very crucial, for securing a new and more ambitious adaptation commitments and adaptation financing. But as the momentum builds for adaptation, after almost 3 decades of climate negotiations, there is need for Africa and Global South to change the narrative around adaptation. I have many times engaged colleagues from public, private, and civil society organizations about our understanding of what is adaptation. Often, adaptation is presented as primarily serving only public good and therefore not attractive to private sector investment that seeks profits. That narrative was boldly improved by the first Africa Climate Summit, and John Macharia has just referenced that. And we had a very successful summit here in 2023. We had a sequel to that this year in Addis Ababa, where we advanced the whole narrative of climate positive growth and advanced the position that for Africa, climate action is about development, it's about growth, it's about jobs. Energy generation and infrastructural development, which may be regarded as mitigation elsewhere, is an adaptation action for us in Africa. Sustainable and regenerative agriculture is adaptation for Africa. Yesterday, I was perusing through multiple emails that come through. I read an article on Bill Gates, who advises a refocus of climate discourse towards more on improving lives rather than emissions and temperature change. He, I believe, correctly argues that the biggest problem, especially amongst the most vulnerable people who are almost most climate impacted, is about poverty, it's about diseases, it's about lives and livelihoods. I believe this argument, to a large extent, resonates with most people in countries with insignificant emissions, like in Africa. It's our chance to reframe adaptation, not just as a coping necessity, but a vast and a compelling investment opportunity. For Africa, adaptation is development. It is how we secure food, water, jobs, and dignity for our people in a changing climate. Resilience is not a grand proposal, but a robust market. Building drought-resistant food systems, and thank you, Agra, for the good work you're doing in that space, creating decentralized solar-powered water infrastructure, and developing innovative insurance products for smallholder farmers are not charity projects. They are high-impact, commercially viable, and scalable business models. They are the bedrock of a modern, resilient economy. In fact, studies estimate that for every $1 invested in resilience and climate adaptation yields up to $4 in return in avoided losses, increased productivity, and improved livelihoods. And that is smart economics. As we look forward towards COP30 in Brazil, Africa will go with a common voice. We are presenting clear demands and a portfolio of bankable, adaptation-focused investment opportunities. Our agenda must be clear. First, we demand scaled-up, accessible, and affordable finance anchored in fair international financial architecture. Second, we must champion innovative financial instruments, from blended finance and first loss guarantees to results-based mechanisms that unlock private capital. Kenya and other African nations are also advancing global solidarity levies, and I'm just coming back for a meeting of the global solidarity levies to look at innovative financing. Modest charges on sectors like aviation, shipping, fossil fuels, to generate predictable and equitable finance for climate resilience. And third, We must strengthen South-South cooperation, including sharing knowledge and co-creating projects with our peers across the global South. So to the investors, to the partners in this room, my message today is simple. It's time we move away from planning and place greater emphasis on implementation of adaptation efforts, the NAPs, National Adaptation Plans, the adaptation communications, and all those other planning tools under the UNFCCC for adaptation, I think are good, but it's now time to move towards implementation of all those plans. Finally, I would like to congratulate KICC, Mr. Chairman, and your CEO for the excellent work. I have been associated with this institution and organization since its formative days in 2012. I had the honor of playing a pivotal role in championing the establishment of KICC in 2012. What was then an idea is today a very impactful organization bringing together discussions for the entire African continent. Let's work together and to nurture a forest of innovations. Let's work together to ensure the forest that KICC has become continues to thrive and to grow and to provide shelter for generations to come. And I thank you all and look forward to working with you, with KICC, and all the participants here. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, I'm a watcher to KCIC. So, so you're still in the room. So think of this as a flight. We're about to board one flight here, and I have my boarding pass. How many of you have their boarding pass? Very nice. So remember to carry it on the next flight. Sawa. And even on the flight tomorrow. It's very important. Without this, you'll not be able to board the flight. Sawa. Kindly remember to do that. Without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, we are about 14 or 15 minutes or so. Let me just confirm, to be exact, 15 minutes into the time for the next panel. So allow me to invite the panel that will be speaking on enabling adaptation, investment, markets for agriculture and food systems in Africa. And this panel would be chaired by Hans Muzora, who is a senior finance specialist at the Global Center of Adaptation. He will be moving the motion briefly before he calls his panelists, who will constitute Kala Legros, Mugwe Manga, Faith Mumo, and Harold Mate. Please be on standby. Your chair will be leading you shortly. This panel will take about an hour or so. Chair, take over.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Bwana MC, and thank you very much, KICC, for giving us an opportunity to take part in this very important event. We've had a lot of work and emphasis on climate finance, but also on adaptation, but very important for us on youth. And before I forget, we have a session right after this on some of the youth entrepreneurs that we have been working with together with KICC. They will be pitching their ideas, great ideas, I must say, and we as GCA continue to pledge to support our youth. To us youth, we see as the great innovators, they are the great adopters, but more importantly, risk takers. And we think they will be, best placed to advance the climate adaptation agenda. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation before I invite the panel. Really, it's to say why adaptation finance, why the private sector, working with the private sector to scale adaptation finance, and how is GCA doing that. You heard from my CEO president on GCA, so I'll not talk much about what GCA does, although I'll talk a little bit about that in the other slides. But I think very important for us, I'm just making sure, is it, okay. Yeah, so the session, as I said, is enabling climate adaptation investment markets for agriculture and food systems in Africa. And at GCA, why adaptation? We've had both yesterday and today the impacts of climate change, how this is impacting, farmers worldwide, youth worldwide, women. So we are trying to look at it from an inclusive point of view, and we think adaptation finance is a very good way of addressing inclusive financing. So quick statistics here. Sub-African 50 million smallholder farmers produce 80%. And those 50 million smallholder farmers, over 70% are youth. Then you're looking at reduction in production by 34%, but also a threat to food security. Again, all this as a result of climate change, and therefore a need to scale adaptation financing. Most of the adaptation financing, from many of the reports and also from what we've been hearing in most of the sessions, has been coming from the public sector. But we also know there are now competing priorities. We're growing a population, more needs for government to spend on other priorities has led to us thinking, to be more innovative and saying, how do we attract more financing from the private sector? So why private sector? It's because of, one, the enormous need for adaptation finance, which cannot be supplied by the public sector alone, but also looking at a number of our countries are having issues with high debt levels, so we cannot continue relying on the public sector to finance adaptation. Adaptation finance has to be scaled up significantly. So we think the only way to do that is working with the private sector. Not to say the public sector won't do that, but we'll also continue working with having those public-private partnerships to get to our targets. Looking at right now 14.8 billion, only 25% is going to agriculture, forest, and other land use. We need to scale that up. Looking at the ratio of international domestic finance for adaptation, 98:2. 98% coming from the public sector and only 2% coming from the private sector. Something has to be done. And at GCA, working with different partners, we are looking at how do we scale that up, as I'll be showing in the next slides. But first of all, like I said, there's been this myth, private sector, adaptation financing should come from the public sector. However, there are enormous opportunities for the private sector to invest in adaptation. There are lots of opportunities for the private sector, both financiers, service providers, and just a few of these areas include improved seeds that we heard about earlier on, post-harvest technologies, on-farm training, extension advisory services, then the digital information, what we'd call digital climate advisory services, as well as water management, solar-powered irrigation systems, and solar pumps. Again, these are some of the ideas we are seeing already being advanced by some of our youth finalists. But these, again, the challenge has been the financing. Because of that perception, the perceived, risk of investing in adaptation. So we need to come up with innovative solutions, de-risking mechanisms. Ambassador was talking about, first loss and other blended finance instruments to unlock financing from financial institutions to lend to these innovative enterprises that are looking to, address this adaptation problem. I said the private sector includes a crucial role in financing climate service technologies, but the challenge, again, like I said, has been, if you look at 98% coming from the public sector and 2% from the private sector, how are they going to get the financing? So at GCA, that's something we are addressing. I'll not talk much, Professor Patrick talked about our AAAP program, but just to say GCA is an international organization that acts as a solutions broker, not as a donor, as a solutions broker. working with different partners, important partners like KICC, working together to address the challenges in adaptation, including adaptation finance. And I always emphasize that so that, we know the difference, because sometimes people are asking, are you a donor? No, we're a solutions broker working with, partners to work together to scale solutions to addressing issues of adaptation. And we are guided by what we call the AAAP, or the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program. Professor Patrick told you about some of the major achievements. Again, if you go to our website, you'll be able to see a lot of the work we're doing right there. I would just say I am part of the climate finance team. We have other teams, including the food security, infrastructure, nature-based solutions. But today being Adaptation Day, we decided to focus on climate finance. So just to say, there's so much that we do, and that's why I'm saying go to our website, you'll see quite a bit. But I want to, read some statement I read just recently that will show you that why climate adaptation finance. They say 98% adaptation finance comes from the public actors. Based on the recent Standard Chartered Bank survey of 150 global investors, asset managers, and bankers, financial firms have allocated just 0.4% of their capital to adaptation projects in emerging markets and developing economies. Just 0.19% of their capital is in adaptation projects in Asia, with 0.07% invested in adaptation in the Middle East and 0.03% in Africa. Standard Chartered Bank, it's a report 2024. I'm happy to provide a link. So what does that mean? We need to work with the asset managers and the banks. And at GCA, we came up and said, okay, we need to scale up investment, attract that financing from the private sector. Who is the private sector? If you look at private sector, all these solutions we're talking about, looking at the adaptation solutions, there are a number of private sectors that can finance this, including insurance firms, including corporates, all these big companies you look at, Cargill or whoever, the Olams, they're working with the farmers, providing them with financing, value chain financing. We are looking at various actors, but who primarily has the financing? And that's why after doing a mapping, GCA comes up and says, let's work with commercial banks. Very important reasons why with commercial banks. They know the local context, they have the local currency, they have the, they are able to influence government to allocate more financing in that sector, but also address the enabling environment. So not to say we're not working with other private sector partners, but at GCA we started, our focus is on domestic commercial banks. And we have what we call a three reinforcing levers to work with these banks to, one, rewire the flow of existing capital towards adaptation solutions. What do we mean by that? Banks already have money. They have their liquidity, my money, your money. We deposit our money with these banks. They are lending it to other sectors. But how do we get the banks rewire that money to adaptation projects? So we are supporting banks, and we realize, one, banks will need quite a bit of information, data, and evidence. Telling banks, oh, lending to adaptation is not good enough. They need the data, they need the statistics, they need the capacity building. So by doing that, we are providing them with products like, for example, climate hazard maps. In Nakuru County, this is what it's like. This is what the future will look like. So what we call climate hazard maps for a bank to be able to tell, okay, this is what the future will be looking like, and therefore this is the kind of climate risk management or climate risk assessments we need to do to make better lending decisions. So that's area number one, while working with banks to rewire the existing flow from their own balance sheets. This is the money you have, this is how you can put it into climate adaptation. We're already seeing, even in Kenya and other countries in East Africa, the central banking regulations are coming and saying, banks, you need to now disclose what they're calling climate risk disclosures. How much of your portfolio is exposed to risks? What kind of risks? How are we managing those risks? At GCA, we are supporting banks, working with them on the climate risk assessments, but also stress testing. Working with a few banks and then scaling this up later to other banks. But for banks to understand, even just their staff, capacity building of their staff, to understand what adaptation financing is. Through our master class that you had Professor Patrick talk about. We've got a master class on adaptation finance, developed together by GCA and the Frankfurt School of Management, together also with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, that we have started. We pilot tested this with a number of banks. We did it here in Nairobi, Kenya, got great feedback, and now we're rolling it out to a number of banks that they have found a very useful tool. This is, of course, for sustainability. We have passed this on to, for example, central banks or training academies to administer this to banks. Quickly, then de-risking and mobilizing new adaptation capital. So again, supporting proposal development for banks, those that need it to, for example, access funding from funds like the Global Climate Fund. You know very well, accessing these funds, you need policies in place, you need a lot in place. At GCA, we're supporting banks to make sure they meet the criteria to access this financing, not just from GCF, other adaptation funds, access the funds, manage the funds, and deploy the funds. Very important. And the third is building a business case that I'll be talking about as well. Because again, telling a bank, this is an adaptation solution. And the bank has this perception that still it's risky. Can you tell me what is the market size of this adaptation solution? What is the return on investment? Those are the two key things. Unlocking the full potential of adaptation and resilience will really rely on two crucial factors. First is the robust, reliable data and in-house frameworks. And the second is adoption of science-based standards that can guide lending. We are partnering with the CGIAR. This is a scientific body with an impact analyzer to be able to come up with these products that banks can look at. But very important, again, that I'll talk to in my following slide, is that market analysis for the banks to say, this is a solution, this is the market size, this is the addressable market size, this is the return on investment, for them to make better lending decisions. And of course, all this has to be guided by enabling environment. So we've got, Professor Patrick talked about the African Business Adaptation Platform. Again, that's on our website. That is convening peer learning, advocacy for greater, better regulation, but also seeing what we call knowledge management and learning. What has been done in Tanzania, what has been done in Kenya. So across our 40 countries, we'll have this platform to convene and share lessons learned. Quickly, this is the study I was talking about. So GCA has conducted a market analysis in the agriculture and food sector for 4 countries: Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, and DRC. For purposes of this meet, I'll talk of the agriculture market study. We're also doing a market study in the energy sectors, infrastructure, and manufacturing. But for here, I'm talking about, we have done a market analysis to demonstrate the business case of investing in adaptation solutions. And we started off with 4 pilot countries. So quantifying investment opportunities in these 4 countries for inclusive service providers, scale financing, which are banks. So Tanzania, Kenya, DRC, and Zambia. And project results for now, like we've developed climate hazard maps. We have prioritized adaptation themes and solutions for each country. When we came, the long list was about 80, but we've come down slowly, shortlisting, and currently developing investment briefs from 5 solutions. So again, from 20 shortlisted solutions, climate adaptation solutions, we have come up with 5 solutions and are working on investment briefs. These investment briefs, when the investors in the room will tell you, this is the market size in Kenya for thematic storage bags, for climate smart, for digital climate advisory services. This is, actually, let me just go. This is the market size. This is the investment opportunity. These are the players in the market. So the adaptation solutions, like you'll see there, 1, the hematic storage, which is a post-harvest technology, 2 solar dryers, 3 cold chain for milk chilling and preservation, 4 solar irrigation, 5 digital climate advisory services. And you'll see these across those countries. So for example, if you look at hematic storage, Tanzania and DRC, that is a priority. In the right-hand corner, you'll see that QR code. The QR code, we're just finalizing these investor briefs. If you want to receive the copies, please scan that QR code. We'll be happy to email you results. And the investment opportunities, the market size for these solutions. So yes, with that, I guess we'll go into our panel discussion. We are privileged to have 4 distinguished panelists, all based here in Kenya, and please help me in welcoming them. First is Carla Legros. Carla Legros is with the CGAP, part of the World Bank. So Carla is a strategic and product leader working at the intersection of agriculture and climate finance in East Africa. She has worked on both the demand and supply sides of agri-finance and oversaw the design and implementation of a multi-million-dollar blended finance initiative for banks and financial institutions across East and Southern Africa, now called ASELI. Now with the CGAP at the World Bank and formerly with Dolberg Advisors, Carla also brings a lens on institutional behavior change and the incentives that drive lending decisions. She is based here in Nairobi. Our other panelist is Harold Mate. Harold Mate from Equity Foundation. Equity Foundation Group, Equity Group Foundation. Harold Mate is an experienced development expert with over 19 years of experience leading transformative initiatives across sub-Saharan Africa. His work spans food systems, market systems development, private sector engagement, agri-SME development, and smart climate agriculture. He has led multi-country programs in livelihoods development, commercialization of smallholder enterprises, climate resilience, and he holds a Bachelor of Science in Horticulture from Jomo Kenyatta University, Master of Sciences in Agribusiness Management from Kenyatta University, and a PhD candidate in Sustainable Entrepreneurship. Welcome, Harold Mate. Next is, and this one is very dear to us, and I'll tell you why. Faith Mumo Timona. Faith Mumo Timona is the founder and CEO of Iviani Farm, a youth-led social enterprise based in Kenya that builds commercially viable climate-smart solutions for smallholder farmers in arid and semi-arid lands. Faith holds a Bachelor of Science in Fisheries and Aquaculture from Jomo Kenyatta University, Intensive Aquaculture Certificate. She combines technical aquaculture expertise with practical business leadership to scale on-farm processing, fish production, and farmer training. Under her leadership, Iviani Farm has grown into a center of excellence that delivers hands-on farm education, pilots low water and circular aquaculture technologies, operates an accredited hatchery, and deploys a mobile factory on wheels. A lot. Why did I say she's special to us? And when I was looking for panelists, talking to in-country representatives, people I knew in my previous work, she was recommended. Just yesterday, I found out she was one of our finalists on our Youth Adapt. So it's no surprise, and welcome, Faith. Lastly, we have Mungwe Manga. Mungwe Manga with the FSD Kenya. Mungwe Manga is a seasoned green finance expert with over 15 years experience in renewable energy and enterprises. Yeah, so quickly, and I know we are running a bit late, but we'll try and be fast. And I think maybe let's start by a general question for all our panelists. All our panelists, starting with Faith. What impacts of climate change have you seen affecting your work or your clients?
Okay, thank you. My name is Faith Mumo. As I've mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Iviani Farm. We are on a mission to create thriving rural small-order farmer ecosystem across Africa. We are working with more than 10,000 small-order farmers to source fruits and vegetables from them and dehydrate them. To your question, for the farmers that we work with who grow these fruits and vegetables, recently we have seen over years, we have seen how climate change has really affected how they farm, because you find the unpredictable rainfalls is causing unreliable yields to these farmers. And also, as well as the heat waves, the increase in heat waves, it's causing most of these, you see fruits mature or spoil very fast when we have heat, like a lot of heat. So they are getting many post-harvest losses because of these increased heat waves. And also, having grown in rural Kenya, I've seen how drastically climate change, how things have drastically changed because of climate change. And also being an owner of more than 20-acre mango farm, I've experienced these climate-related shocks firsthand because we have experienced these unreliable yields from the farm, and also a lot of post-harvest losses. And then the other thing, and I think the similar is affecting the 10,000 smallholder farmers that you are working with. And also the other thing is the change in pattern, like weather patterns, has increased pests and diseases, which attack these crops and diseases. And you find that even the traditional methods which were used earlier on, they are not right now effective as it was earlier. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Harold.
Thank you, Hans. And I do not introduce myself again, but I would want to say it's Equity Group Foundation. So yeah, thank you. I think I will just talk about what has been discussed before, because in terms of unpredictable weather and post-harvest losses, but I will not go into the details of that because I think those are what we can see with our eyes, especially when there is no rain, when there is excess rain, flooding. Those are the first things that we see and we experience. But I would want to look at it from SME or business perspective. So one is in terms of lost business. So when our agri-enterprises are faced with difficulties, especially when they cannot get their produce to markets, when their outgrowers are unable to deliver quality because of some of the things I've mentioned here about pests and diseases, rotting of commodities. We also think about lost investments. We are talking about investment in agriculture, but when that is followed with no produce, for example, when we have droughts, then these investments are sunk by these investors, and that's a challenge. We also have lost markets because the key issue is, can we be able to actually market our produce? And if we cannot be able to produce and supply to markets, those are lost opportunities. For some of our clients, especially if they're in the export business, one season can actually mean death to that agri-enterprise. They have to suffer huge losses. Maybe they have loans that they have to invested in these production systems. We also have unemployment. So if some of these small and medium enterprises are employing youth and women and other workers, and then within that season they are not able to meet their production targets and revenues, then what follows in the next season is basically unemployment. So we have a myriad of challenges that come in, especially when we talk about the impacts of climate change. And I think these are some of the things that we need to start thinking about, and how do we mitigate, how do we adapt to ensure that even when we face these challenges, are we able to bounce back in the following seasons, and maybe put in place mechanisms that can allow these business and agri-enterprises to be able to continue doing what they are doing in the agricultural space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harold. We've had, the banks. So the risks are real. The challenges are real. We're seeing that. You've heard it right from the banker. Carla?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. So my background is, I currently work at CGAP, which is a research organization within the World Bank that focuses on financial inclusion. And previously, I was working at Aseli Africa, leading their product team, and Aseli provides results-based incentives to commercial banks. So I'm giving that introduction because I'll mostly be speaking from an institutional behavior perspective. So what I would like to contribute to the question is that there's nuance in who's impacted, who's acting, and how. So the closer a financial institution is to the climate vulnerable, whether those are sectors or populations or different types of enterprises, then the more likely it is to be impacted. And that's kind of clear. I'm basically preaching to the choir at this point. But what I think is interesting is that there's often a lag in behavior change. And basically a major reason for this is that climate risk at this stage is not yet classified or quantified as climate risk. It's just classified as general risk as of right now. And what that does is that it further disincentivizes or further excludes sectors or populations that have been historically seen as risky, because there isn't that nuance between climate risk versus other types of general risk. So I think what we're seeing is that some financial institutions are actually retreating when they experience a climate impact. And then there's a second bucket where they are reassessing. They are basically in a diagnostic phase. They are trying to figure out, okay, if we want to engage in these sectors going forward, how do we do that? How do we do that prudently? How do we do that in a way that makes financial sense for us? So it's basically a spectrum of behaviors. But I think what the positive development or the positive angle to this is that the ones that are retreating, that retreat often is temporary as they figure out what to do. And a lot of institutions believe that agriculture is central to their growth journey. So that is an asset that they want to continue pursuing. They're just trying to figure out how to do that well. And so they're motivated to try to find ways to engage in ways that meet their financial goals, but also help to build the resilience of those sectors. So that would be my perspective from an institutional behavior angle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Ungwe.
Thank you. I think first and foremost, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. For me, I think there are two areas I would look at. There's the known knowns and there's the unknown unknowns. And firstly, when you look at health, which through the UNFCCC has demarcated as the face of climate change, health and the emergence of viruses such as COVID-19 driven by climate change is going to have a huge impact in accessing markets. And this is going to have an impact on agriculture. We saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of horticultural producers, particularly in Kenya, that accounts for a large part of our agriculture, could not access the traditional markets that they could access. And you found people hoarding and, hawking flowers in Nairobi that we never used to see before. And then you have areas within inter-Africa trade. You see the outbreaks of like Ebola. It then means that you cannot access markets in, for example, in the Congo, where it has been emerging. And this has been a very big market in Kenya, for example, for the fish market. So understanding the impacts of climate change when it comes to health is going to be quite critical, because when you have health issues, you're going to have market issues. The second part I would like to discuss is on infrastructure. We know that climatic conditions have impacts on infrastructure, and it's very good to see GCA and through the AAAP program, how they're trying to assist governments in thinking through climate resilient infrastructure. Because we've seen in the past countries that are always undergoing tremendous amounts of stress when it comes to climate change, like Mozambique. Critical infrastructure gets washed away. What does that mean for agriculture? You can't get your produce to areas that ought to get there, because these are also consumer markets and they're also producing markets. So thinking around how we're going to adapt towards health and infrastructure, to me, are going to be two critical areas to discuss and to think through if we're going to have a more resilient future, because this is going to become more and more common as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bungwe. And since you still have the microphone, well, each one has their own microphone, but you saw my presentation, so I talked about some of what we call commercially viable solutions, adaptation solutions, and one of those that I mentioned was the Digital Climate Advisory Services. I know FSD has done some work around that area. in your experience, what do you think of this solution being commercially viable or being adopted by financial institutions?
Data is going to be critical in this whole process. And I really commend GCA's work in this. I think we're headed in the right direction. At FSD, we do see data being a very big driver in coming up with solutions, because without having the data analytics, it's going to be very difficult to come up with the right innovations and the right solutions for the markets. Now, the question is, who is going to take the leap forward in doing this? And this is where organizations like GCA and FSD come in to say, we are willing to assist the markets as a think and do tank to take the first steps towards actually actualizing strong data processes, thinking through how we're going to do the data analytics, and working with partners. IGAD, the data center for IGAD, is working very well. They have extremely exceptional data when it comes to weather forecasting. GCA is also doing the same, and I think creating an ecosystem of like-minded partners, especially at a time when ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, is declining, is going to be critical in making sure that we do reach the mission and the goals that we ought to when it comes to creating data analytics and the right frameworks. So yes, number one, it is absolutely critical. Number two, it's going to take partnerships. And thirdly, the data has to be localized, and it needs to reside within the continent. Why do I say that? A very good example is in the AIDS sector, HIV/AIDS. One of the major areas that many people don't realize that the pullout of USAID created was not so much even financial, it was a lack of data. They went with a lot of data, disaggregated data, when it came to HIV and AIDS. So many governments, particularly in Southern Africa, were not able to disseminate the right policies because that data was no longer available. So ensuring that this data is going to be locally resided, is open access, and is going to enable the market system to change in the right formation is going to be absolutely crucial.
Thank you very much. I know I have my colleagues in the room, so you're validating, and we are getting feedback, and definitely we'll incorporate that feedback. Thank you very much. Carla, I know you talked about institutional change, but maybe if you could, I know you worked with firms like Aseli and others. Could you tell us what types of financial products or instruments have proven most effective for adaptation investments?
Thank you. So before I answer that question, I'll go on a side tangent. I think before we talk about products, we need to talk about definitions. And when it comes to adaptation, that definition can be quite broad. And I'll try to illustrate this with an example. So you have to start by understanding what is the climate outlook for a particular country. So a country like Kenya, where drought is much more prevalent, will be quite different than a country like Tanzania, which has some of the highest numbers of water bodies in the world and therefore more risk to flooding. And so once you understand that climate outlook for the country, you can then figure out, well, what does it mean to adapt to that climate outlook? And then from there, that's when the investments will come up. So once you understand what does it mean to adapt, then okay, therefore, what types of investments enable that adaptation? And then from there, talking about products. So it's kind of a 3 or 4 step process. So I wouldn't say that there's a single best product or a few best products, but there are a few that I've come across in my work that I'd like to share with the audience. The first one is contingent credit lines, which is basically, credit lines that are decided upon before the shock and only access if and only if the shock actually materializes. And what that does is that it helps enterprises or populations be able to access liquidity when it's really needed, and it shortens the response time frame. So that's number one. Number two is enhanced guarantees. When I've spoken to banks across the region, and if you're trying to get them to lend to, let's say, dry and semi-arid areas, they will tell you, I want to do this. Let's say the agribusiness team will say, I want to do this, but I need the buy-in of my credit and treasury team to do so. And what would actually move the needle for me is to have an enhanced guarantee that is dedicated for my lending to that region or to that geography. And sometimes that enhanced guarantee needs to be 3x what it is for other geographies. But they believe that that's what will move the needle because they have understood the risk in those areas. So that's number 2. Number 3 would be results-based incentives, which Hans knows from my previous work, where we are trying to boost the economic returns for financial institutions to continue to engage in climate, to basically help them with a ramp until they start to do this themselves without the support of development actors. And then a 4th one is flexible tenor or repayment structures. My colleague on the panel spoke about COVID-19, and COVID-19, that period was an illuminating period even for the financial sector, because it showed the ways in which they are willing to innovate when there's a significant shock that shows up, and how, for example, they were able and willing to adapt the repayment timeframes, they were able to adapt the tenors on the different loans, and that can be utilized for a climate context as well. Because climate has the potential to be as big, actually, I'll correct that, significantly bigger than what COVID-19 was. So those are the perspectives that I'll share, and I look forward to hearing from the others on the panel.
No, thank you very much, Carla. And you brought up something very important. So definitions, yeah, totally agree. And since you talked of maybe Harold, could you share a real example where your institution has financed an adaptation solution? Again, depending on your definition of adaptation solution, feel free. Yeah. What worked and what didn't work?
Yeah, thank you, Hans. And I think I totally do agree with what Carla shared, especially when I'm sitting from the financial institution perspective on climate adaptation and the risks that are involved. But when we talk about financing and supporting climate adaptation in our context, one is that we will look at it in terms of ability for our clients to bounce back when an event occurs, probably if there's a flood, there's a drought, there's a pest infestation. How do our clients come back to continue doing what they're doing? And that's the lens we look at it from. But of course, from where we sit, then we talk about risk. If we are lending to SMEs and smallholder farmers, for us is to think about their ability to repay. Because yes, I do think the statement you made about this has to be business, and I think also His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned that it's going to be business. It cannot be, our usual approach to development. And for example, in Kenya, we have been able to work with over 3.8 million farmers. And one of the risks that we have was the inability to make decisions for these farmers, especially when to plant, what to plant, when to harvest, post-harvest management. Basically because we couldn't make very accurate, predictable weather patterns. For example, they would imagine, and I give an example of, basically last week I was talking to a farmer who, when it rained, I think like 2 weeks ago, they ran into the farm and planted. And then the rain disappeared for about 2 weeks. And that farmer, now that the rain started, maybe about yesterday again, they have to go into their pockets and think about fertilizers, seed, labor, and all that to be able to come back and plan for the season. And if they have no access to capital to be able to finance these activities, it means that this farmer actually is not going to have meaningful harvest for this season. So, for example, in Elgeyo Marakwet, we had this farmer who was growing tomatoes. And as we said, you have to understand the context in terms of suitability. And when we do our capacity development work at the foundation, we have to look at viability of what the farmer is doing. So one of the recommendations we did was to say, we do think that pawpaw would actually be a better take for you as a farmer. It's profitable, the weather and the environment here is suitable, and we're able to finance and link you to financiers who can be able to help you get into this kind of farming. And we were able to do that, and now the farmer is saying, it doesn't think you'll go back to tomato. Not that tomato is a bad crop, no. I know tomato has quite some not very good name in Kenya. If you ask farmers, they will tell you very different stories. But we are saying you need to adapt yourself to what works for you in this context. Even in terms of dairy, we are farmers who have been able to grow their herds from as little as 3 cows to about 35, and we have to work in terms of capacity development, them understanding what it means to be financed to buy these cows. What are the right equipments do you need to have, the kind of technical knowledge, so that you can get results. And for now, they have doing about 10,000 liters a month from about 1,000. So you have to think about the many facets, and there is no silver bullet to this. You have to look at each region specifically. Even in Kenya itself, Kala talked about East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda. They are all very different contexts. Even for farmers themselves and value chains, they also present very different risks and issues that need to be dealt with in a very specific way. So because of time, I'll give those two examples. For tomato to pawpaw, profitable, growing of the herd to from about 3 to 35, but also the farmer now seeing what it means to run that enterprise in the context of climate change and being trying to adapt to the new emerging issues. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Harold. And to the point, adaptation finance is already going on. You can see equity already. So we know there's been this perception that, financing agriculture is risky, even adaptation financing is more risky. But we can see just from his talk, they're already financing adaptation. So how do we scale that? And that's what we are looking at from the GCA point of view. How do we address the issues that he talks about so that they can increase their adaptation financing? Thank you, Harold. Faith, can you share a real example where your organization, Vienna Farms, received finance for an adaptation solution? What worked and what didn't?
Okay, thank you. 4 years ago, after being a victim of post-harvest losses for years, we received a blended finance, which enables us to install a village industrial power machine, which is a machine that uses bio-waste or organic farm waste to create three-phase electricity and steam, which we use to dry fruits and vegetables for smallholder farmers. So this financing helped us to develop climate shocked faster, to respond to climate shocks faster, because we were able to provide ready market for the farmers right at the farm, and also we were able to create a center for training for farmers for them to adapt to sustainable farming climate, even amidst of climate change. What worked is that the technology gave us a reliable source of electricity, and also we were able to provide market for the farmers, create jobs and create decent jobs for youth and women at the local community. And what didn't work is that the loan was 3-year loan, and we quickly realized that we needed a bit longer to repay the loan, given the venture that we were getting to it was greatly affected by climate-related shocks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. And, when we talk of financing, I always hear people talk of loans. Grants are also financing. And at GCA, as you may have heard, we are supporting GCA, and I think Agra MD talked about it, but GCA is supporting youth with grant funding. So far, we have done 4.1 million USD for 41 youth-led enterprises, and they have unlocked over 8.1 million collectively. And today, as I said before, during our Youth Adapt session, we'll be hearing youth enterprises that will be pitching to a jury as well as investors in the room that will be also providing grants in our next round. So it's it's good to know you're already receiving loans, but also maybe grants for other areas. Most important for me is to manage even the loans. So just giving loans to enterprises that may not be able to manage this financing can be a problem. That said, Faith, and again, maybe this question goes to you. Can you speak to the importance of capacity building and training for end users, that is farmers, but also enterprises? How is this support critical for enabling uptake of adaptation solutions and repayment of loans that you just talked about? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe that adaptation starts with knowledge because you can't adapt or practice what you don't know. So when we started this venture 4 years ago, we contracted farmers and we gave them inputs on credit. But soon we realized that they were not able to repay the inputs because of the low yields and not so good quality that they produced given the climate-related shocks. So this called for, like, farmers needed to be trained more on regenerative agriculture methods, which was going to lead them on sustainable ways on how to be able to produce more quality and quantity produce using the technology and also adaptation, like innovations which are currently available. Yeah. So in terms of capacity building, it's not optional. It's a mandatory venture that we have to get into for adaptation to take place. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. Totally agree with you on that. Harold, how do you currently view agricultural adaptation in Africa? Is it primarily to reduce and manage climate risks to your operations as the Equity Group Foundation, or do you see this as a strategic investment opportunity?
Thank you, Hans. Allow me to actually backtrack a bit and weigh in on my panelist, what she has said. In terms of capacity development and training, actually, we have been able to see at the foundation the difference between farmers that we have capacity built and those we have not in terms of their NPLs or PR, in terms of ability to understand adaptation, but also to actually repay their loans. And of course, they're only able to repay if they're able to generate revenue, profits, and be able to pay. So that's really a critical point to that. But coming to whether it is a strategic issue or is it just to reduce our risk in terms of operations, I see it primarily as a strategic vision. One, because we are saying for us to be able to move forward in Africa, we must think about the future. And the future is saying that we must adapt. And for us to do that, then we must start making strategic investments on where do we put our money and how does that money and finances enable us to adapt and become better at it. Of course, for every institution to be sustainable, you have to also think about your operational risk, and I think the issue of credit risk was mentioned, because you can imagine if you just lend out there and you're not able to recover your money, then there is no money for tomorrow. So for me, I look at it as two-way, but primarily is a strategic issue. If we have to survive the next few decades, we must be strategic in terms of where we're investing, and for me, that is really a big issue. And also, probably you did mention about grants, and I think just to talk about grants as a short-term strategy to just enable and de-risk, but in the long game is to ensure that we are able to mobilize private capital, and that basically comes through financial institutions. So, yeah, thank you.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Carla, how can financial institutions design financial products that reflect the realities of African smallholder farmer cash flows and climate vulnerabilities? You've just had Harold talking about, they don't want their NPLs, they have to make sure, the farmers understand and able to pay those loans. So maybe based on your experience, if you could talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
So I will largely echo his points because there are genuine challenges on both sides. So for financial institutions, the loans that smallholder farmers would be seeking to access are small, and the costs to actually make these loans and to monitor them over time tend to outweigh, the revenue that would come from these loans. And at the same time, a lot of the smallholder farmers or smaller enterprises, or even the medium-sized ones, need quite a bit of technical assistance, capacity building, and these are added costs for financial institutions. So at the same time, even when financial institutions do this, sometimes there are some missed opportunities or some errors in the design. So as we heard earlier, for example, the loan tenors might not match the production cycles, or the repayment schedules don't take into account delayed harvests because of the systemic risk that agriculture faces. from conversations with financial institutions, the ones that seem to be doing this well tend to be quite well equipped with data. And what I find interesting is that the data tends to look in different ways. It looks differently across the board. So they have deep knowledge about the value chains that they engage in through the loan officers, or they have quantitative data that they're tracking over time. But I know from experience that a lot of that data actually lives in PDFs and lives in people's brains. But basically engaging with smallholder farmers requires a high degree of capacity within the financial institutions. And often it might seem like these initiatives are not bankable, which is where actors such as ourselves can come in and help to de-risk these additional activities that the financial institutions have to take on for lending to smallholders to make sense. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kala. Mongwe, at FSD, what market signals or evidence have convinced you or not that adaptation solutions in African agri-food systems can be commercially viable?
You know, I think for us, we look at this in one simple way. And it's the principles of the 3 Ps, which is number 1, prosperity, number 2, people, and the 3rd, planet. And the challenge that we are seeing in the market is also a communication challenge, because when we speak of adaptation, mitigation, we lose people. And climate change is as much human as it is technical. And we need not forget that. And so being able to communicate that whatever you do, yes, you may have an ESG framework, but do not forget that everything that you do must go centered down to people, planet, and prosperity. And we are encouraged that this, as a subset of what we're trying to achieve as a whole, can be profitable in the long run and can have its space in solving this challenge of adaptation, mitigation within the climate change space. So, 1, it's about creating a narrative that is simple, that is easily grasped by the people, because this is going to be very much driven by human beings. And then the second is being able to have the goodwill and the courage to seek innovations and products and solutions. Oops, sorry. I think that is telling me to stop. So I will leave it there and hand it back over to you. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And yeah, like I think, I don't know whether that's something telling us that there was that intimidating screen showing us that, we had run out of time. So as we wrap up, a question for all of us here, all panelists, and thank you very much for your insights. Imagine Africa's agri-adaptation market in 2030. What does success look like, and what one action must we start today to get there? And I'll start with you, Mungu, again, and as we wrap up. Thank you.
I think quite simply, agriculture is there to create jobs. Agriculture is there to feed the people. My vision is that within that time period, Africa will be able to feed itself and to export its surplus and to create enough green jobs, again, to harness the 3 Ps: people, planet, prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll take a more technical answer, or a technical angle to that answer, at 3 levels. The first one, definition for adaptation, so that we're clear on what needs to get financed to develop agricultural food systems. The second one is around risk pricing and risk management, that it becomes more part of core banking rather than something that is an add-on or is still nebulous in shape. And then the third one is that financial institutions continue to be supported. 2030 is just 5 years from now, so there's likely going to need to continue to be a high level of support as financial institutions become much more involved in that space, and I'd like to see that continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
For me, I think I will just say one thing, that the only constant thing is change. And even the climatic issues that we are dealing with today, we are not guaranteed that they are not going to change to something else in the future. One thing I think is we need to adopt scientific methods to be able to at least understand what is going to happen in the next few years. And with that, then be able to provide sustainable solutions so that our response time is shortened. Because if you're not able to respond as quickly, and I think what Mungo was saying in terms of response to COVID, really was a big lesson that the faster you're able to respond, the better the outcomes and the impact of what you're going to do. So when we are able to put in place mechanisms that can allow us to respond fast, for me, I think that is what I would think success is about, because we are going to have these changes as we continue, and we are not guaranteed that something new is not going to crop up. Thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. For me, by 2030, I imagine an Africa where small-order farmers are thriving even amidst climate-related shocks. And one of the call to action is acceleration to finance, accessible financing to village-based value addition factories, because they can easily respond faster to climate-related shocks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our distinguished panelists. Bwana MC, I've kept my promise, 11:15, dedication and efficiency. Yeah, and we're going to take a photo shoot.
All right, there you go. That photo can be used as collateral for financing. I promise you, you can. Promise you. Go and give it out to the Equity Bank guys. They're going to give you a facility. It's like, yeah, I know Mr. Murabula. He was in my picture. Can't you see? Just sign off the loan, disburse to this account. Chap. Yeah? Thank you. Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. All right. And thank you so much for, thank you so much to the chair of the panel for keeping your word. Allow me to give the last directions for the first session of the morning, that we have come to the end of the morning session. Henceforth, what will be happening is you're going to have plenaries. So there'll be a breakout room. There's some of us who are going to be here, and then there'll be another one on the other side. I'll give those directions briefly when we come back from break. Your health stroke tea break starts now. It's for the next 20 minutes. I'm going to ask Mr. Murabula and the chair, Mr. Kihumba, to speak to Helen Aura from Nation Media Group. Helen, please. There you go. We want you briefly for just a few sentiments on the first panel for our editorial purposes tonight. So kindly speak to Helen Aura. Helen is at the back right there, Mr. Murabula and Mr. Kihumba. The rest of you, you're free to go for break right now for the next 20 minutes or so. See you after the break. I'm going to give more directions after that.